So the liturgical calendar for the year starts with Advent. That being said, we're in the last couple weeks of this liturgical year. And we find that as we approach the end of the liturgical year, the Church uses the scriptures to remind us that we will someday approach the end of our time on earth, whether our own death or at the second coming of Christ. Either way, this time here is limited. And so our readings today remind us exactly of that. They remind us of what is important, that this life is transitory, but what comes after is eternal. And that being said, that's exactly what wisdom is about. Wisdom is always about the proper ordering of things, putting things in their proper place to contribute to the greatest good. And as Catholics, we believe that there are temporal goods, but much more important is the supernatural, spiritual, eternal goods. Our first reading reminds us that wisdom is available to everyone. Wisdom is not reserved for some select few, but wisdom seeks you just as much as you should be seeking wisdom. If wisdom can be understood in a certain sense to be the Son of God, wisdom is the one who is seeking us out. Wisdom is for all, not just for some learned people in the world. Our second reading, of course, tells us much about that second coming of Christ. That Paul is reminding us that the dead in our life, those we know who have died, are not without hope. And that is to say that they can live with Christ. This reading from Thessalonians is actually where a lot of people get the idea of a rapture from. However, the church does not believe in the so-called rapture, where at the end of time, people are literally snatched up into the air and saved. Of course, it seems to contradict much of the book of Revelation, and as well as what we know Christ's second coming to be somewhat about. And that is because Paul is using an image actually of someone who's receiving a victor, like a war victor back. That there used to be a custom that the general who won the battle, in his return, the other people from the city or from the county, or the country rather, or whatever area, would come out to meet him in a celebration and then return home. And so when Paul says that we're going to meet Christ as he comes again, he's saying that Christ has already won the victory and we get to share in the spoils. That in some day we'll be able to participate in his victory to the extent that we will get to live with him forever. Christ has conquered every enemy of humanity, that last enemy being death. And so someday we too will share in that victory, that despoiling of death itself. And the gospel, most importantly, reminds us that it's up to us to decide to share in that, though. So there we have the wise virgins and the unwise virgins, and some have oil for their lamps and some do not. The Christian fathers often interpret this oil just being the love for Christ and grace from the sacraments. And that being said, that's something that can't be shared, something that each person has to build up for themselves. It's important to distinguish, though, that it's not the matter of fact that someone can earn oil, that they can earn salvation. It's rather that what we have stored up for the when the bridegroom returns, what we have in faith, what we have in charity, is to the extent that we are ready to share in that victory. So those who are not prepared for the coming of Christ are those who have chosen not to foster that love for him here and now. And so it's not that those wise virgins are being selfish, but it's that it's up to us each individually to decide for ourselves to love Christ and to be prepared for his coming, right? The more that you desire something, the more joy you have when you receive it. And so the coming of Christ can be received joyfully or without joy. It can be received with fear if someone is not ready. And so we should practice every day desiring more and more Christ coming into our hearts. So when he does come, we can receive that with as much joy as we possibly can. And ultimately, in that victory of Christ, be joyful with him forever.